brothers and sisters, dear listeners. We have a very special guest again with us this morning. We have Mr. John Perkins, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He is coming to Australia and New Zealand for a tour as part of the Solutions for a Better World tour, and he will be participating in a number of conferences in a number of different capital cities around Australia and in Auckland, New Zealand. His first conference will be on Saturday the 24th of February in Darling Harbour. All the details are at inforeset.com and it will also be on my Facebook. Good morning, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, how are you today, John?
Very good, thank you.
That's good.
How are things in Australia today?
Oh, it's a very fine day today, actually. It's looking like it's going to be a very nice day as well. You know that when you arrive in Australia, we're still in summer, so it will be most likely a very warm time. Perhaps to also match the warm reception that you'll get from the Australian public. John, when most people think of a hitman, they think of an assassin. And your first book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, has opened many, many eyes that a hit can take many forms and can be made against an entire nation, not just one person. This, I know, will surprise some of our listeners. Many people don't know that modern-day interventions can take many forms, including the destruction of another country's economy. Can you please outline to our listeners just what an economic hitman does?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that distinction because, my official title was chief economist at a major international consulting firm out of the United States. I had anywhere from 35 to 50 people working for me at various times doing this work. And my job really was to identify countries with resources our corporations want, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money would never actually go to the country. Instead, it would go to our own corporations, big engineering firms or suppliers of equipment, like Bechtel and Halliburton and General Electric, and to build huge infrastructure projects in that country. Things like power plants and industrial parks and highways that, first of all, made big profits for our corporations, and secondly, helped a few of the very wealthy families in those countries. These are countries like in Latin America, Africa, Asia, so forth. Helped a few wealthy families, the families that owned the industry, that owned the commercial establishments and the bank. But the rest of the people really suffered because money was diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to pay the interest on the loans. And in the end, the loans couldn't be paid off, the principal. So we'd go back and say, hey, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, your oil, whatever the resource happened to be, to our corporations at a low price with no environmental or social regulation, or allow us to build a military base on your soil, or sell off your private sector businesses like your electric utilities and your water and sewage systems to our corporations. And really, in that way, we created a very modern form of imperialism, of an empire. It's really a corporate empire, almost more than an American empire. But I will also add that in the few cases where we failed, where leaders of countries did not accept these loans, then the jackals went in. And these are the more classic type of hitmen, like you described. These are people that overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders, usually CIA assets. And so the leaders of these countries knew that if they didn't play the game with us, they might very well be assassinated or overthrown in a coup. So there's a lot of pressure on them.
So I take it that those contracts and projects that are sold to these countries would be sold at very inflated prices. Would that be a correct assumption to make?
Yes, certainly they never get any really good deals off these things. So usually the project itself would be sold at inflated prices, at high prices. And in that process, the contractors, the U.S. corporations that get the contract, would work out deals with members of the ruling family who signed off on the deal. So they would always get a share of the profit. Now, in general, this was not illegal corruption. They didn't get handed money under the table, so to speak. But we would know, for example, that they had college-age children or children that were coming along in college, and we offered to get them in U.S. colleges, get their kids, and this might be as many as 20, 30 kids if you work through all the families of the government officials. Get them scholarships, pay for all their wages and everything to go to college for 4 years, and maybe longer in the United States. That was a big gift. But we would advertise it. We'd be open about it. We'd say, hey, we support educating people from Brazil or Panama or wherever. We didn't bother to say in our articles that we only supported the children of very wealthy politicians. We simply made a big deal of the fact that we were contributing to education with these countries. Well, and we'd also hire, maybe the president's brother owned a small contracting company, and we'd hire them to dig ditches or lay pipe or whatever, and we'd pay them a premium. We wouldn't try to get a discount. We'd pay them more than what the value of their work was, but that's not illegal to do. So although the country itself paid premium prices, many of its leaders ended up getting really good deals.
And I suppose if you bring the children of the wealthy elites into your country to educate them, you can be very selective in their circle of friends to make sure that they are also indoctrinated to be very pliant in the future should they ever take important posts in the governments of those countries.
Absolutely. We bring them. Usually, my firm's headquarters are in Boston, so Boston has a lot of colleges, so we would get them into Harvard or MIT or Boston College or Boston University or one of the other colleges, and we would also give them jobs during their vacations at summer in our companies. And so they would really become indoctrinated because they become part of our family, and they would benefit tremendously from this. And of course, they would see the best side of being wealthy in America, being in positions of power in America. So yeah, it was an indoctrination process, also a rather subtle one, but nonetheless a very effective one. And they would often become the leaders in their countries later on, and just perpetuate this cycle.
John, what skills or training does a person need to become an economic hitman?
That's an excellent question. By all rights, I should never have been a chief economist. I had a Bachelor of Science degree in business administration. I never got a master's. I never got an MBA. But I was in the Peace Corps for 3 years in the jungles of South America, in the Amazon rainforest, and in the Andes. I spoke Spanish fluently. While I was there, I'd been contacted by a senior vice president at the company I had been in. I ended up working for. And I'd been interviewed by the National Security Agency prior to going in the Peace Corps. They'd put me through lie detector tests. They'd put me through all sorts of tests, very expensive on lie detector equipment and so forth, and offered me a job. But instead, I went into Peace Corps with their approval, with the National Security Agency's approval. So they really had me marked as a person who didn't mind lying, could be really sort of a con artist. And I talk in my book, The New Confession of an Economic Hitman, about how I had dropped out of college earlier. I ended up going back, but I dropped out, and a friend of mine who was Iranian had gotten in a knife fight in college, defending me in a barroom brawl, and the police, the campus police, had called me in and interrogated me. And I denied anything. I lied totally to them. When I'm on the lie detector test with the National Security Agency, this comes up that I have to be honest because I'm on a lie detector. I say, yeah, I lied to the police. I was in this barroom brawl. Well, and I thought that would be my death now. I thought they wouldn't be interested in me anymore. So it was just the opposite. They liked the fact that I was willing to defend a friend under interrogation. And why? And also, what my friend was Iranian, and his father was a general in the Shah's Air Force, and worked for the CIA.
Wow!
So this is a real plus as
Yeah.
far as what I thought was a negative was a plus. So let me just answer your question. The skills that I needed to have were those that I could convince people, that I could come across as sincere, that I could write. They needed good reports, and without a lot of data that I could write economic reports without much data. The three people who've been hired before me to do this job had all been fired or left because they couldn't do the job. They couldn't survive in the rural areas of Indonesia. They refused to write economic studies if they didn't have good data, and so on and so forth. I could get around all that. I was not a good economist, per se. I didn't know mathematics and econometricians and stuff like that, but I hired these people. So I hired PhD economists. I hired MBAs. I hired people to do the work that supported the conclusions that I wanted to come to.
So, John, I want to take your mind to another point, that when you succeed in clinching a deal, when you succeed in convincing the decision makers in a country to do exactly what you want. Now, I would presume that when you convince them and you succeed in convincing them, there would be a moment of joy. But then as you reflect, I've just done something to this country that is going to put it in debt for a long time. I'm just wondering, for the benefit of our listeners, if you wouldn't mind exploring some of these feelings, the joy, and then perhaps the remorse after the fact that the decision's been has been done in your favour.
I like your questions. You're probing deep and asking very good questions, and I certainly appreciate that. So let me start by saying that when I began this job, I thought what I was doing was the right thing, because in business school, and I did have a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, and if you read the literature from the World Bank, and once I got into this job, I did a lot of studies. I probably got the equivalent of an MBA, but just myself teaching myself. What you learn is that all the economic models then, and still to this day, taught in universities and MBA programs, is that if you want to help a poor country get ahead, you do invest a lot of money in power plants and water systems and industrial power. Exactly what I was doing. And statistically, we can show that that works. The economy of these countries does increase when you do these things. So I thought I was doing the right thing to begin with by convincing these presidents to take these loans and do this. What I didn't understand until I got much deeper into it is that the statistics are very skewed to very wealthy people in those countries. And so if a few wealthy families that really make up the economic statistics to a large degree are doing well because they're getting electricity, they've got highways and industrial parks and so forth, then it looks as though the whole country's doing well. When in fact, often the case is that the poor people and the middle class people are doing worse. And we can even take this to a world level now. Recent statistics have come up that 8 individuals have as much wealth as half the world's population. So if those 8 individuals are doing well economically, and that other half of the world's population isn't doing so well, it'll still look as though the world's doing well, because those individuals are so that they have such a huge influence on the statistics. And this is true in basically, I think, most every country. In the United States, 3 individuals have as much wealth as half the U.S. population, the lower half of the U.S. population. If those 3 individuals are doing well, it looks as though everybody's doing well. So, but it took me a long, long time to understand that. And once I understood it, then my conscience began to bother me. But in a way, I was trapped in the system for another few years. So I stayed in a total of 10 years, and in the end, my conscience bothered me, and I had to get out. And as far as working with the leaders, it was once I understood the backstory, the shadow side of what I was doing, I was still in a dilemma. For example, I was trying to convince Jaime Roldos, the Ecuador president, the democratically elected president, and Omar Torrijos, the head of state of Panama, about the same time to buy into these loans. Neither of those men wanted to do that. They were very adamantly opposed. I liked them both very much, especially Torrijos of Panama. I was very good friends with him. And I knew that if they did not buy into these loans, then something dire was likely to happen to them. So even though this is later in the game, I'm understanding what a bad system this is, but I'm still trying to help these heads of state who I am afraid for, and convince them that they need to do what I'm asking them to do for their own safety. Neither of those two individuals did do it, and both of them died in plane crashes, private plane crashes, that I'm totally convinced that most of the rest of the world were CIA assassinations.
So they're really in a difficult situation. When a country is targeted, it seems that they really don't have a choice. They're not left with much of a choice. What can they do to avoid such an economic hit?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. If you're the head of a country and you want to do the right thing, and you know that if you don't do what the economic hitman is asking you to do, you're likely to be overthrown or assassinated and replaced by someone who then is going to be terrified, and your replacement is going to go along and play the game. What do? It's an extremely good question and a very, very difficult one to answer. What I do now when I meet with these kind of people is I say, organize amongst each other. So in that case, it's too late for this, but in those days, if Jaime Roldos of Ecuador had gotten together with Omar Torrijos of Panama and with the heads of states of other countries in Africa and in the Middle East and in Asia, and they'd all gotten together and stood up to the system, I think that would be the strongest thing that could be done. Now, today we've got a little different situation because suddenly China is emerging. And China has these two big international banks, the AIIB and the BRICS Bank. And these are actually world banks now. There's many countries that are contributing to them. And China's going into these countries and competing head-on with the World Bank and the IMF and Wall Street with the American and European banks. And so these banks, like the World Bank, they're having to back off. As I travel in Latin America, I just came back from about 2 months in Colombia, Guatemala, in Costa Rica. I spend a lot of time in Latin America today, speaking and doing meeting with leaders. And I hear over and over from these leaders, we're much more likely to take loans from China or the Chinese-backed banks than we are from the United States and European banks. Because even though we think that China may have the same motives, maybe they just want to steal our resources like you guys did, we don't know that for sure. What we do know is that you have proven, the United States has proven that it will overthrow our leaders or assassinate them. You've located military bases on our soil. You've put very tough conditions on the loans you give us. China's not doing any of that, or hasn't done any of that yet. So in a way, the rise of the Chinese empire, so to speak, is creating a balance. The leaders now in these countries have an alternative. For many years after the end of the Cold War, after 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, the United States had the complete reign here. And even for many years before that, like when I was in economic hitman, we always had the upper hand. But that's changing now. And China's doing some very bad things in some of these countries. I'm not promoting the Chinese model necessarily, but I am saying that it's offering an alternative, and it is forcing, like the World Bank, to reconsider its position. So,
I suppose, in a way, if you go with the competition, they also have a vested interest in protecting you because you've made a contract with them.
That's right.
It's like being between a frying pan or the fire. Either way, it's dangerous for those countries. And as you say, unity amongst these countries getting together may well be their salvation in the long term. John, when you decided to speak out against the system, and when you wrote your book, Confessions of Economic Hitman, was there any repercussions? What happened in the aftermath of coming out and bringing this information to light?
Well, if I back off and tell you that what actually happened, when I stopped being an economic hitman in the early 80s, I started to write the book. But this book, I decided would be an expose, and I started contacting other people who had jobs like mine and people who were the jackals. I knew some of these people personally. As soon as I started contacting them, I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life, and that of my daughter, who was an infant at the time. And then at about the same time, I get taken out to dinner by the president of Stone & Webster, a big engineering consulting firm in Boston. It had been a competitor of the company I had just left, which was Charles C. Maine. And this president of Stone & Webster took me out to dinner, and he says, hey, you have a great resume. You were chief economist of our rival, and we'd like to use your resume in our proposals. You don't have to do any work for us. Just let us use your resume, and I'm prepared to write you a check for $500,000.
So bribery.
Tomorrow. As a consultant's retainer. It's totally legal. It was bribery, but it was totally legal. Consultants' retainers are legal, although that was a very large one. And he said, and then he looked at me and he said, just don't write that book you're working on. You can't be in this business and also write that book. So my life's being threatened, and I'm being offered a bribe, a legal bribe. And of course, I took the bribe. I knew how dangerous these people were. My daughter was involved. But in my own defense, I would say that I didn't go out and buy a couple of mansions or a private plane or cars or anything like that. I put the money into going back to Ecuador in the Amazon rainforest, where I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, and meeting with the people there and saying, I want to help you save your forest. I want to help you save the rainforest. What can I do? And out of that grew the nonprofit organization Dream Change, and later the Pachamama Alliance, which is still in existence today, now involved in over 80 countries. And I wrote 5 books on indigenous people, shape-shifting, the world is as you dream it, psycho-navigation, and 2 others, which was okay with Stone & Webster that I write those books. So I really took the money and invested in a new career and invested in forming these nonprofits to help change the paradigm in the world as well as save the rainforest. The Dream Change is about changing the way we look at doing business in the world. And so in the long run, I took that money and invested it, I think, wisely. And then at 9/11, I was deep in the Amazon on 9/11. My contract with Stone & Webster had ended, and I flew back from the rainforest, from the Amazon, and went to New York to Ground Zero. And as I stood there looking at that still smoldering pit, I didn't really believe the official story. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew at this point I needed to write my book. But this time I decided I wouldn't tell anybody. It wouldn't be an expose where I'd interview other people. It would be a personal confession that I'd just write from a personal standpoint, not have to tell anyone. I'd write the whole book, not just a proposal, and keep it in secret so nobody could threaten me or bribe me. And once it was totally done, I got it in the hands of a very good New York literary agent, sent it out to publishers, and at that point I figured it was my best insurance policy.
Yes, well, indeed. And this book, as I understand, is an international bestseller. Do you have the latest figures as to how many copies have been sold?
Oh, goodness. I don't keep track. It's way over 1 million. It's in, I think, now 33 or 35 languages. It's still selling big time. And then, this last year I came out with the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which is even better. It updates things. It has a whole strategy for how we turn things around, and it updates the old Confession. And it's selling very well, too. So, I intentionally don't watch those numbers too much. I want to focus on writing the next book, which I'm working on now, and my speaking engagements. So, I've been invited to Australia to speak at 4 different cities there, and then also in New Zealand. I just came from speaking in Costa Rica and Guatemala and Colombia. And I do a lot of speaking at universities in the United States. So rather than thinking about kind of commercial success I have, the proof is that I get invited to give talks at all these places, including at big corporate conferences. Earlier the thing was in September, October, I spoke at the St. Petersburg, Russia International Economic Forum. 12,000 people there. Wow. CEOs of Fortune 500 corporations. President Putin was also on the same stage I was on there. So, I'm being invited to do all these things, and so I'm looking at this as a huge success, something I totally did not anticipate, but I'm very, very happy to have the world stage in a way to be able to speak out about what's wrong with our current system. It's a global system. It isn't just an American system. It's what I call a death economy. It's failing us globally, and we need to turn it around and create what I call a life economy. And to me, this is a very, very exciting time. And to have the opportunity now to go to Australia and speak to so many people in 4 of your major cities in Australia and then go to New Zealand, I'm so thrilled to be able to do that and to get to meet some of your listeners.
Actually, John, you're absolutely right that it is a false economy, and from our religious teachings and religious, moral, ethical teachings, we know that anything that's established on corruption is going to fail in the long term. It's going to produce bad results. The short-term financial gains that they make will carry a major curse with them, a curse that is based on all the people who have been exploited and hurt and ripped off. I don't know if you've done much research about the British East India Company and how it exploited the Indian economy and how it was a major force in the invasion and subsequent occupation and atrocities that happened in India. I know that the series of movies, Pirates of the Caribbean, captured some of the activities to some extent, probably with some exaggeration of the East India Company. But those amongst the listeners who may be from an Indian background or a Pakistani background will have heard stories from their parents. Can you tell us anything about it? Have you looked into it, into their activities and how they impacted on India at the time?
You know, you broke up on me just a little bit there. Which company was that?
The British. It was a British company. It was called the East India Company. That was basically.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah. I mean, the East India Company, of course, has this incredible history. The American Revolution here in my country was fought really against the British East India Company much more than the British government. In the United States, we like to sort of think that we were fighting the crown. But in fact, the East India Company at that time controlled most of the world's commerce. Over half the world's commerce was controlled by them. They had a huge mercenary army. And in fact, they basically dictated terms to the British Army and to the King George III. And so they've been incredibly powerful for a very, 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 very long time. Huge influence, there's no question. And in a way, they sort of set the standard. Companies today still are following big time, and it's fascinating how we've seen this. We've gone from like this control of this big British company, the East India Company, and now we've reached the point where we've got all these tentacles of these octopi, these different companies that are huge, reaching around the globe, and they're all focused on one goal. And that is maximizing short-term shareholder profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that's a terrible goal. It's causing the system to break down, but like I said, a death economy. And, it's so interesting to me that, in this tour in Australia for the InfoWest seminars, I'm going to be joined as I speak at all these different events by Conchita Sarnoff, who's an expert in human trafficking, and also by Sean Stone, who's Oliver Stone and filmmaker's son, and an expert in geopolitics and peace. And what we realize as we move through all of it is that so many of these things, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's climate change, whether it's war or the monetary system, all of these in a way are symptoms of a cancer. So this is the symptoms of a more serious disease, which is a total global system. And it's an economic system, but it's also a political system that's global, and it really has created this, what I call it death. What a lot of economists today are beginning to call a death economy, which is an economic system globally that's consuming itself into extinction. It's chewing up and eating the very resources upon which it depends without any view of the long term. It's all oriented to the short term. And how, in order to really delve into all the symptomatic problems like human trafficking, which as I mentioned when they were speakers on the Info Reset seminars we'll be speaking about, and peace and climate change and so many of the other symptoms. In order to deal with it, yes, we need to put Band-Aids on all those symptoms. And beyond that, we need to dig into the very heart of the system and change this death economy into a life economy. And to me, a life economy is an economic system and a political system that pays to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environment, to create new technologies that recycle and that use, solar energy in ways we haven't even conceived of yet, and the wind and the water and the air and so forth. It's a very exciting time. We can move into a whole new economic system. We can have growth. It just goes in very different directions from what we've been having in the past.
It's great that you mentioned your fellow speakers. Actually, our listeners would have heard my interview yesterday with Professor Conchita Sarnoff, and earlier in the week with Sean Stone, and perhaps after the interview, I'll send you links to those interviews and also to your interview, John. Just finally, I know that your time is very valuable, and I'm very grateful that you've given me so much of your time this morning. I just have one final question for you, and this question is two-pronged. How to identify an economic hit. I know the leaders will have an idea, but for the population to actually start to understand that their country is targeted and is going to be hit, and what can they do about it at a population level?
And that's really why I wrote the new book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, because it delves into both of those questions in some detail, and it's a little difficult to summarize. In the book, The New Confessions, I have a long list of things that students can do, corporate executives can do, parents can do, retired people can do. This is a list for everybody, and there's a strategy that we all can follow as to how to turn this thing around. I think as far as identifying it is concerned, we know now that the system that I helped to develop back in the 70s of hitting other countries was so successful that it's really come home to roost in Australia and New Zealand and Europe and the United States. We're all being hit hard by this debt thing now. This education debt, this healthcare debt, this credit card debt. There's all kinds of debt that really enslaves people. And I think to begin with, we need to be very, very careful not to get into that. Beyond that, as I said, there's a long list of specific things. But from a general standpoint, we need to recognize that big corporations control the world, and much more than government. The Australian government, the United States government, these are controlled by big corporations to a very, very large degree. But we, the people, control the corporations. If we really set our hearts and minds to it, they are totally dependent on us. They cannot survive, they cannot prosper unless we buy from them, work for them, manage them, invest in them, and to really understand that. And the power that we have in those positions. Consumer campaigns, for example, are extremely powerful. They ended apartheid in South Africa a number of years ago, back when I was in college, through consumer campaigns. We've raised the right of indigenous people and women to hold important jobs today to a level that was unthinkable when I was in college because of consumer campaigns. And so on and so forth. So I think, and in this time of social media, it's easier now than ever. I would just end by saying that as I meet with CEOs of many important companies around the world, I hear over and over from some of them that they want to create a better world. They have children and grandchildren. They're scared. They know the system is not working. But they say that if they change things in their company and they lose shareholder value, the stock price goes down. If they lose market share, their top shareholders will get them fired and replaced by someone who only cares about stock value or market share. So they say
they're all caught in this vicious cycle. They're all caught in a system that they realize is not really good for them or their children.
That's right, and they know that. So reach out there as you're going around speaking out. Get them to write letters. The president of Nike, Mark Parker, says exactly this. Like, I want to be greener, but I know that Phil Knight and my other stockholders will fire me if I lose market share. So he says, hey, get everybody that you talk to write a letter saying, hey, Nike, I love your product. I want you to be successful, but I won't buy any more from you unless you pay your workers in Indonesia or wherever a fair price. And if each of your listeners picks a company and does something along these lines, and then reaches out to all your social networking circles and asks them to do that, and reach out to all their social networking circles. When these executives have 100,000 emails or tweets or Facebook posts that demand that they change, they can then take this to their main stockholders and say, "Hey, these are our customers. We've got to listen." So again, there's much more specific things that each individual can do in the book. But the most general thing is we need to exercise our power as consumers, or as investors, or both, or as employees, or all of those, and understand that we, the people, ultimately have to change this.
So what you're saying, John, is that each individual has the power, that each person should not feel weak or disempowered or helpless, that each person has the power to bring about change. All they have to do is start speaking out, and they can start doing that as individuals. They don't have to do it as a collective. Each person can take responsibility and write a letter on their own.
Exactly. And you mentioned Gandhi earlier. Anybody who's listening can think it's whoever their hero is, be Mother Teresa or Gandhi, whoever it is, and realize that person, when they get started, had no idea they were going to be successful. Gandhi had no idea. Mother Teresa had no idea, and none of these people did. And they got started. And each and every one of us has that ability. We all have passions, and we all have skills. And if every one of us directs our passions and our skills, whatever they may be, toward creating a life economy, a world our grandchildren will want to inherit, we'll get there. So, I write books, because that's what I enjoy doing the most, and that's what I think I'm most effective at. But if one of your listeners is a carpenter, build houses or whatever you do with the sustainable materials as you can find, and tell your clients why you're doing this. And you may say, hey, you may be paying a little bit more right now, but you're investing in the future for your kids and your grandchildren. Plumbers can do the same thing. Dentists, teachers, parents, every one of us can take a different route. But let's all head toward creating this life economy, a system that's really going to work, a system that's going to be itself a renewable resource.
Well, that's a very good positive note to conclude our interview. And listeners, I would strongly recommend to get yourself a copy of John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, or his new book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and also to take advantage of the conference, to attend the conference in Sydney on the 24th of February in Darling Harbour. More information at www.inforeset.com, or you can follow my Facebook post, which will have that information as well. Thank you very much, John, for giving us your valuable time this morning, and I certainly look forward to seeing you at the conference, to meet you in person, and to listen to your wisdom and the wisdom of the other speakers, and perhaps to raise some questions at the conference as well.
It's indeed been my pleasure. Thank you, and keep up your great work.
Thank you, and good morning to you, John. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Very good. I can't wait to meet you. And again, keep it. What you're doing is so very, very important to keep sending this message out. And I deeply, deeply appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, John. And we'll see you on the 24th, inshallah.
All right.